Well, good morning. Let me welcome you to our press conference here. I'm Texas Senator Bob Hall, representing the 2nd District of Texas, which is in east part of Texas. And we're going to have a discussion this morning from several doctors in Texas and other states that have been treating the COVID with existing medications. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of different things being done, and the purpose of this is to provide scientific information relative to what could be done to actually medically treat the this COVID. And so, to begin this, I'd like to show you a slide that is, will come up here. Yes. Okay. Show you a slide that that confirms what many doctors have been saying, that the use of hydroxychloroquine will reduce the number of deaths. This is data that is in a chart that is in a lawsuit by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons that was filed against the FDA to get them to open up the use of hydroxychloroquine. And if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see those that are in blue are the countries that have allowed the use of hydroxychloroquine, and that is in red. Those are the countries that have not allowed it. And you'll see that the death rate is about 10 times higher in those countries that are not allowed to use the hydroxychloroquine as opposed to those. And this is based on hundreds of thousands of patients of data. And so this is not anecdotal, this is actual data. And it's in the lawsuit that the association has filed that says that we need to start protecting the people of Texas. I mean, our job in government is to protect the liberty and lives of people. And what we're doing is not doing that. We are trampling their liberties and we are not protecting their lives, because had we been using hydroxychloroquine and some of the other drugs available from the beginning, or like we were in the beginning, we would not have the deaths in Texas that we have. Probably 90% of those would still be alive today. And I think that's a sad state of affairs. And so with that, we've got several doctors going to tell you about what they personally have been doing. And I'm going to start off with a presentation by Dr. Amy Offit. Amy Offit is a doctor from out in the Marble Falls area. So,
hi, this is Dr. Amy Offit, and I'd like to talk to you today about who is at risk for serious COVID-19 related disease, meaning serious enough to be hospitalized. First, I'd like to talk to you about kids. I have 3 kids of my own, and I'm happy to say that 2 of them attended summer camp with about 1,100 kids this summer, where I'm one of the camp doctors, and we did not have any serious illnesses at all related to COVID-19. This was very reassuring for me, both as a mom and a doctor, and I'm hoping the data I share today will be reassuring to parents out there who are concerned about sending their kids back to school. Since March 1st, we've had 576 kids in the U.S. hospitalized with COVID-19 related illnesses. If you put that in perspective, we have about 74 million children in the U.S., which means that about 1 child for every 128,000 plus children was hospitalized. You can tell from seeing these numbers that the risk for the pediatric population as a whole is much less than the risk for the adult population. It's also nice to know a little bit more information. About 1/5 of those kids hospitalized were babies, and 16% of them were premature. 38% had obesity, which to me is a red flag that we should all be doing more to help kids be healthier and stronger.
So this is showing.
And 18% had chronic lung disease. In our pediatric population, just to reassure people that COVID-19 has a very, very low death rate in the pediatric population. Most of our deaths in the U.S. in kids occur from car crashes, and then unfortunately suicides, homicides, and other accidents like drowning. So who is really at risk for serious COVID-19 related illness? It's people with these particular health conditions
Okay.
primarily. This chart is from the CDC, and you can read it for yourself. But compromised patients, sickle cell disease patients are also included in this group. I wanted to also offer a little positive information and show you that our hospitalization is COVID-19 related disease, meaning population. It's also nice to know a little bit more information. Who is at risk for about a fifth of those kids hospitalized were babies, meaning serious enough to be 16% of them were premature. First, I'd like to talk to you about kids. 38% had obesity, which to me is a red flag that we should all be doing more to help kids be healthier and stronger as a baseline. And 18% had chronic lung disease. I also wanted to put some death rate information in our pediatric population just to reassure people COVID-19. Hi, this is Dr. Amy.
Okay. I think we're having a little technical difficulty with this. I'll try to get it straightened out and get back to finishing her a little bit later here, if I can. Okay. Let's go to Dennis Spence now. Dennis is a retired physician with 35 years of experience, a board certified oral and facial surgeon and a level 1 trauma hospital in East Texas. And Dennis is just a friend and a neighbor, and he's been helping me with the medical community here and understanding how to pronounce some of these multi-syllable words and leading me through this and talking with others. And he does have a great deal of experience, and he'd like to talk to you briefly. Dennis?
Okay, well, thank you, Bob. And I want to be sure everybody understands that Senator Hall has been a real linchpin in getting this whole thing together and helping get the word out. And a lot of the things we're talking about are common sense things, and we somehow a little bit of that has been lost. And I'm hopeful that we can bring some of that back to reality, or bring people back to the reality of what's really going on. Before we get into the science and the clinical experience of hydroxychloroquine, I just want to be sure everybody understands there are some simple things you can do. And hopefully everybody's heard this before, but we always like to add this in because sometimes it's easy to forget. Obviously, a healthy lifestyle, a healthy diet, and exercise are paramount for your overall good health. Don't think because you're in lockdown or anything else that you should forget about the basics. Those are still terribly important. Malnourishment or being obese are two of the very things that can affect your immune system and your ability to deal with any kind of virus, especially this one. Vitamin supplements, the water-soluble vitamins like vitamin C and B complex, especially B6, are useful. Take those before you eat. Fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D, especially D3, and also vitamin E can be useful unless you've got some kind of bleeding problem, and then you want to take vitamin E under the direction of your personal physician. But those things are helpful. And then, of course, the mineral zinc. Everybody keeps hearing about zinc. Zinc comes in some vitamin preparations that are already available. Sometimes you can take it on the side. But at any rate, those are little things that everybody can do, and they can do right now. One other, or some other things that I think you need to realize is one of the biggest things that we've lost in this overall pandemic is choice. In the past, we've had the freedom of choosing our physician. We've had the freedom of choosing a car. We've had the freedom of choosing whether we go to a game or doing things like that. The point is, choice has been taken away from us. We are being mandated on things that we have to do, and this must change because our country was not developed without this particular thing we call choice. So I hope everybody will realize that that's probably one of the most important things about this. I think you should have the freedom of choosing. If your physician offers you a treatment modality, you should have the right to choose whether to accept that or not be told whether you can accept it or not. Uh, some questions that I think would be interesting if the press would follow up on. With a drug that has a low cost and a long, long history of use, we all know that hydroxychloroquine, or the chloroquines in general, over 1 billion doses have been administered worldwide. And if there was any safety issues that were of any significance, we'd all know about that. And that drug wouldn't be as popular as it is worldwide. You've got a low cost drug, you've got an easily available drug, you've got a proven drug that's been out there for 65 years. What is the downside of using that drug as a preventative or a prophylactic or early treatment for early onset COVID? There is no downside. I ask you this: what is a greater risk for you dying from some cardiac complication that is so rare with the drug, or from you having complications if you develop COVID and you're told simply go home, take 2 Tylenol, and call me when your respiratory problems become so acute that we need to put you in the hospital? So there's a question that needs to be asked. There's other things like mask usage. I'm not going to get into the details of the fine art of developing a mask or the filtration of it, but I do want to ask you this: do masks actually encourage people to act foolishly? Do they perhaps encourage people to act recklessly or illegally? I think we're starting to find out that that is more of the case.
And so that's a good place to
There's no
transition,
consequences
Dennis.
because nobody knows who you are. That's a problem. Um, One of the other things when we talk about lockdowns, the very thing that we try to encourage people is we know that sunlight and UV light helps. We know that being outdoors in a higher temperature and higher humidity helps. And yet we tell people go indoors, air conditioned, dehumidified places, and think that the virus is not going to be more active indoors than it is outdoors. Well, we know it is. So these are all things that are contrary to what's being done now, and things that I think should be corrected. We're waiting around for a vaccine. The best vaccine ever developed so far is only about 40% effective, yet we need 70 or 80% herd immunity to have an effective defense against this virus. We're going about it wrong. And I think early intervention is the way to go.
Thank you, Dennis. And I think this is a good segue now to go to Dr. Stella Emanuel, who out of the Houston area, who has been working with early intervention. And Dr. Emanuel is a first-generation Cameroonian American. She's trained in Nigeria as a general practice doctor, then got into pediatrics at the Bronx Lebanon Hospital. She now runs an urgent care clinic in Houston, while continuing to work in the emergency room. In Nigeria, she became very well versed in the use of hydroxychloroquine for malaria. She is treating COVID-19 patients with hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and erythromycin, with over 600 patients and only one fatality. Dr. Emanuel, tell us more about what you've been doing.
Mute.
Dennis, you need to move. Mute. Dennis, mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Thank you for bringing me on, and it's always great and an honor to be part of this town hall meeting. And but all I would say is hydroxychloroquine works. It's not anecdotal. I see it every day. If you've seen over 600 patients and you see that people are living, they're not dying, diabetics are not dying, people with obesity are not dying, COPD patients are not dying, old people are not dying. Like I said, we've had one fatality. It was a 92-year-old that when she started getting a little dehydrated from the anosmia, and she said she didn't want to go to the emergency room because they were going to lock her up and she'll never see her family. So she basically refused to do anything and said she was ready to go. My husband died, she wanted to go to heaven. But that's the only patient we've lost so far. But it's been a great pleasure taking care of patients, and with all the backlash and everything. So I trained in Nigeria. I'm from Cameroon. I trained in Nigeria. We used hydroxychloroquine. It was actually chloroquine. And we used chloroquine, camokine, flavopine. Had family members use it. My 80-year-old parents are on flavopine right now, and we used to take it at home. We call it Sunday medicine. You know, we took it every week. They'll gather all the children and stuff Vapino, Flamopino, one of them in your mouth. You know, so because of this, it's a very common medication. Lupus patients take this medicine for years without any problem. So I don't see how a lupus patient can take hydroxychloroquine twice a day for years with no complications, and then all of a sudden it makes sense that if you take it twice a day for 5 days, it becomes a problem. So these are some of the things. And one other thing I'm going to say is that a lot of the medications, the QT prolongation that I talk about on hydroxychloroquine, over hundreds of medications have the same side effect. Nobody forces about us taking Zitromax or Bactrim, or nobody forces about us taking a Cipro or Zofran, and these are all medications that cause QT prolongation. So they've just used something that is something that is very common with other medications to just bash these medicines. I don't know what the problem is, but I believe that I actually honestly believe there's a diabolical plan to destroy the human race or something, because I can't understand how there can be an effective medication, and many testimonies are coming from people that this medication is working on effectively, and there's just a bashing. Well, we're being attacked by the insurance companies. Some of the insurance companies I was applying for dropped me. We're being attacked by big pharma right now. If we give prescriptions, big pharma doesn't want to fill it. We're being blocked by social media. We're being, I mean, it's coming from even the state, the medical board is coming after us, and then the media. So it's just, there's something going on. And I think right now we have to get to a place where we get back as the nation. The citizens have to arise and say, no, they can't take this choice from us. We have people that are in the hospital just crying because they need hydroxychloroquine, and nobody will give it to them. So this medication works. Patients come all the time. I've put hundreds of people on prophylaxis, treated hundreds of people, and they're doing well. It works. And I'm not the only person saying this. Many doctors say it works. So it's time for us to let, like I said, let my people live. Let us live. Let us have the choice to take this medicine. Even if it's a dangerous medicine, which is not, we should have the choice to take it. So I think it's time for us to take this battle to the masses and let the masses arise. I said, no, this cannot continue. If everybody takes hydroxychloroquine, we can get back to school, get back to our businesses. If people are treated early, and I keep saying early intervention, early hydroxychloroquine, zinc, azithromycin given early can stop COVID in its tracks. Very effective, does very well. So I'm just concerned. So we need to get this to the people, and the people have to arise. It's time for the masses to arise. It's time for all of our patients to start coming out and talking and saying, I was treated, I got well, I got better. And one last thing, you see, COVID hit Nigeria the same time it came to America. The people that left from Wuhan and went to Nigeria in that January time, the only reason why this COVID did not sit in, they should find out, why is it that a country like Nigeria that is overpopulated, there's congestion, it didn't sweep through the country and kill everybody? It's because when the people left Wuhan and they were going to Nigeria, the CDC, of course, and WHO always advised them to take anti-malarials. So a lot of them landed in Nigeria with anti-malarials on them that knocked out the virus. That is why this virus was not seeded into this country. I say it over and over, you cannot social distance in Lagos City, or you cannot even social distance in some of the slums we have back in Africa. The healthcare there is not that major. But you know what? The patients, they are living because they're in a malaria endemic zone, and a lot of them have been taking chloroquine. And right now, that will be more vocal about it. Basically, doctors are calling from all over the world, telling me to give them the regimen, to give them what we're using. So now, if COVID got into Nigeria in January and got into the US in January, and then it did not multiply in Nigeria, why didn't it multiply in Nigeria? People need to start thinking and start looking at these things, analyzing them. The people that got to Nigeria had anti-malarials on, so they could not seek the virus into that country. Hydroxychloroquine works, and we need to stop letting people die.
Thank you, Dr. Manuel. I really appreciate what you're doing, and those people that you have served and have kept them out of the hospital and kept alive. I know they really appreciate it too. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Tom Reed. Dr. Tom Reed is up. Dr. Tom Reed is a double board certified award-winning medical and surgical specialist who has invented devices and surgical procedures designed to improve orthopedic surgery. With over 35 years experience, he has seen a wide variety of disorders, including diabetes, obesity, vascular disease, high blood pressure, dementia, various forms of cancer, and biomechanical disorders. In recent years, he focuses on researching and teaching about healthy lifestyle practices as the preferred alternative to chronic disease and medications, emphasizing the importance of physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being over health. And Dr. Reed, Sully, go ahead and mute your mute, please.
Hey, Bob, did you want me to do stats and then right after that do a mask, or how did you want to do that?
Go ahead and do them both.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and run through both of them now.
If you'll be patient just for a second, because I've got to do a screen share here. I've got some slides, and I think that tells a wonderful story.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm going, let's get rid of, there we go. Okay. Okay, what's going on here, babe? Here we go. Okay, what I want to talk about are stats related to the coronavirus. Exactly how bad is it? And so we're gonna just take a look at the numbers. And the first thing I want to do, though, is just give you a big picture perspective of the coronavirus. There's actually hundreds of coronaviruses that infect animals, and there's 7 that we know about that infect humans. The first 4 that you see on the screen are the ones that are responsible for the typical cough, cold, flu symptoms that you may see on a yearly basis. They're very pervasive. They're infect people all year round. And these are the symptoms that you typically will see. And there's 3 out of the 7, there's 3 that are more pathogenic. You have MERS and SARS-1, which appeared in 2003, and SARS-2, which we're currently dealing with. And SARS-1 and SARS-2 are very closely related. So how contagious is COVID-19? Well, let's just do a comparison here. The global statistics show that from a comparison standpoint, if you take a look at measles, there's something called an RO value, and it's not perfect, but it kind of gives us all an idea of how these different viruses how easily they'll spread. So for instance, measles has an RO value of 15, and it spreads very easily, but it's not really deadly. Then in the middle there, you will see that SARS, the original SARS 2003, has an RO value, and basically means that for every 1 person that gets infected, it's going to be transmitted to 3 people. And right now, we actually won't know what the RO value is for COVID-19 until really this ends, maybe until the season ends. But it started off being about 2. This was the estimate, and now there's some range between 2 and 5, depending on which report that you're accessing. The seasonal influenza, depending on which strain will actually be prevalent during the season, or how the different strains that'll be prevalent, you'll have an RO value of 1.3 to 3. So you see that COVID-19 and the seasonal influenza are close. COVID-19 seems to be playing out as being more contagious. By comparison, I want to do something here just to show you statistically the difference in the number of cases that we see. And I think what we'll end up finding is that the spreadability, the RO value, how contagious COVID-19 is, will actually drop. If you compare this to the flu season of 2017, 2018, there were 48 million plus cases. And I say plus cases simply because not everybody that has the flu goes to the doctors. It's the same thing with the flu. Right now, the diagnosed cases amount to 5 million cases. And so you compare that to 48 million cases that we saw in 2017, 2018 with the flu. So let's take a look at how deadly it is. Well, if you compare to Ebola, Ebola actually has about the same RO value or spreadability pattern, or how contagious it is. It actually compares to pretty close to the flu and to COVID-19, but it will take probably 50% of the people, which means that 50% of people, if they contract Ebola, will die. Now, these are global statistics that were first created early on through what's called the predictive contagion model. And it's called the global case fatality. And this model was actually developed from the very first cases that were reported from China. And there weren't a lot of cases involved with this study, but this whole model, predictive contagion model, was developed from the research that they did on the number of deaths that were being shown from China. And the case fatality rate is actually those people that have contracted the disease and then died from it. And this 3.4% is what drove all of the reaction. It was responsible for all the panic and all the fear that was created, because what they thought was that millions of people were going to die if they contracted the disease. Now, this 1.0%, what this represents is the new estimate that they had when they realized that they did not include the unreported cases. But the narrative that went out there that everybody hung on to, including the media and a lot of other people that were in reporting about the disease, they hung on to this 3.4%. But in reality, it was more like 1.0%, because they were then including the unreported cases. And that will lower the percentage, the overall case fatality rate. So far, we have about 160,000 people who have died once they have contracted this disease that we know about. However, there's another statistic called the deaths per population. And what that means is that what are the chances of any one person catching the disease and dying from it? Well, as it turns out, that percentage is 0.047%. Now, you compare this with the seasonal flu and translate it in terms of what's called case fatality, which are deaths over actual infections. Now, these actual infections include those people that have been infected but have no symptoms or very minimal symptoms. And as it turns out, the case fatality is very close to the flu, seasonal flu, at 0.1%. So the case fatality is estimated at 0.1% to 0.4%. And what they're realizing is that the researchers are realizing that there's a whole lot more cases out there than are being diagnosed. And that's where these numbers come from. So if you look at the population under 49 years of age with symptoms, 0.045% will die. That's half, less than half of the seasonal flu, about half the seasonal flu. And so the biggest question is with the mandates that are being implemented throughout the country, closing down businesses and keeping kids out of school and so on, the chances of the vast majority of Americans of catching the disease and dying is 0.05%. But this is a really, really important statistic. And it may take a second or two for this to soak in, but it's very important. 45% of all COVID deaths, nearly 50% of all COVID deaths are coming from 0.62% of the population. That's less than 1%. And those people are those in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And yet we're shutting down the entire country out of fear. And that there's a saying that critical thinking is the first casualty of fear. And I think that's what we've all done, is that we're not really looking at this for what it is. If you want to compare it to the flu, I think that's perfectly fair. Actually, the death rate, the actual death rate, it looks like it's below the seasonal flu fatality rate. And the seasonal flu actually takes way, way, way more children than this COVID-19 does. And so is the seasonal flu more dangerous? Well, I think an argument can be made for that. And I do want to show you why those numbers are fluctuating. It's kind of like a moving target in terms of how many cases there actually are, how many people are actually infected versus diagnosed cases. And Penn State University did a study, and what they found was that the actual infection rate may be 80 times greater than originally reported. Well, if the infection rate is 80 times greater, then that fatality rate is going to come way, way down. And what they said is they found 8.7 million new cases during the last 3 weeks of March, compared to 100,000 cases that were actually officially reported. And so you can see that the way that this is panning out is that there's a whole lot more cases out there of people who are asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic and never go to the doctors and never get diagnosed and never have a positive test. Says our results suggest that the overwhelming effects may have less to do with the virus's lethality and more to do with how quickly it's able to spread through the communities initially. And again, the vast majority of the fatalities are coming in a very small segment, and those are people that have been in nursing homes. Okay, Bob, I'm going to go ahead and talk about masks, okay? I'll get there in a second. Let me just
go on to mask. And
I will. I've got to go through these instead of, here we go. Okay, we're going to talk about masks. Do they work? Do they not work? How beneficial are they? How harmful are they? Well, the first thing I think to understand when we're talking about what the safety and efficacy of masks and the mandates that are being implemented regarding masks are, well, are these masks really blocking out the virus? It's important to understand that the SARS-2 coronavirus in diameter, it's about 0.1 microns. And the same pretty much is for the flu virus as well. So they're pretty comparable. Wearing a surgical mask, I wear masks, in surgery just about every week. And I feel very, very comfortable in the OR with it. And there's reasons for that because of the air exchange in the OR versus the air exchange that you'll find when you're, for instance, in a box store. It's much different. But about 70% of the air flows through the mask and about 30% goes around it. Now, research shows that the N95 masks can only filter out particles larger than 0.3 microns and larger. So the coronavirus and flu virus particles are much smaller at 0.1 microns. And so you can see here, just from the research that's out there, that the N95 masks, surgical masks, cloth masks, they're really not effective or very minimally, insignificantly effective. So the study showed that they're no more effective than the standard surgical mask. And so N95 masks, when they're being worn outside, people have an unrealistic sense of security with these because the research does not the research shows that these are not effective in filtering out the viruses. Even in a publication from the Center of Infectious Disease Research and Policies, wrote a commentary that masks for COVID-19 not based on sound data. And in the article, it states that there's no scientific evidence that they are effective in reducing the risk of SARS-CoV-2 transmissions. Sweeping mask recommendations, as many have proposed, will not reduce SARS-CoV-2 transmission, and that the masks may confuse the message and give people a false sense of security, which they have. Even the CDC, this comes from their website. It's a statement of efficacy on masks. Most people develop SARS, become infected through contact with other people who are ill with SARS, not by breathing contaminated air. If a person does contact the SARS virus, it is most likely to be on a surface such as a doorknob. The best protection from SARS in public places is to wash your hands frequently and avoid touching your eyes or nose. There's another article in the Journal of Evidence-Based Medicine, which states that the N95 respirators are no more effective in preventing influenza than the surgical masks are. Back in late May, the CDC was telling practitioners that this information was put together from the CDC and passed out at a doctor's office. It says CDC does not recommend that people who are well wear face masks to protect themselves from respiratory diseases, including COVID-19. Also, the WHO, World Health Organization, says basically the same thing. If you are healthy, you only need to wear a mask if you are taking care of a person with COVID-19. These are the late May guidelines after the fatality rate really started to drop significantly. Well, do masks, I think one of the ways to have some very concrete evidence is with the protests that have occurred recently. And the question came up, do masks and social distancing really help? And what they found is that what you would expect is that the cases of COVID would spike in all the cities that had these protests. And the vast majority of those people were not wearing masks. Some did, most didn't. And they certainly did not abide by social distancing rules. And what they found that they were not experiencing the spike that they should have experienced when all of these people were getting, these tens of thousands of people were getting together. So I think that speaks volumes on its own. And lastly, I want to talk about this this letter that went to the administration to Washington, signed from 600 physicians, saying that this lockdown is just a mass casualty incident. And the things like that are increasing, that researchers are finding, is that social conditions like alcoholism, homelessness, suicide, heart attack, stroke, and so on are increasing dramatically. So this is very, very serious. We have to look at the consequences of our actions and understand from a logical standpoint and from what the data actually shows that perhaps what we have implemented with the social distancing and the masks and the lockdowns are actually harmful in many ways. And those things really need to be considered because people's lives are being lost unnecessarily. We have thousands of people that are dying unnecessarily because of some of the mandates that have been implemented. Okay, Bob.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Reed.
Stop and mute.
Yeah, go ahead and mute. And now I want to go. Okay, now I want to go to Dr. Brian Proctor from McKinney. Dr. Proctor is a family medicine specialist in McKinney, has over 23 years of experience in the medical field. He graduated from Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center of Medicine Medical School in 1997, and he's affiliated with medical facilities such as Baylor Scott and White, Centennial, and Baylor Scott and White in McKinney. And Dr. Proctor has been very vocal about what he's been doing in treating patients here, very successful, and he's going to tell us a little bit about now what he's been doing. So Tom, go ahead and mute.
So can everybody hear me?
Yep. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Audio's good. Okay.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Proctor in McKinney, Texas, and I've treated about 350 patients now with COVID actively in my office. And back when this started in March, I thought I was just doing what I was supposed to do by abiding by the Hippocratic Oath that I took 23 years ago. I didn't understand that other doctors at the time weren't doing this. I had no idea I was some type of a rogue doctor. I was just doing what I was trained. When the epidemic started, I went out and I did a bunch of research on my own, and I came up with a protocol. I implemented the protocol, and it just happened to work pretty well and happened to be similar to what thousands of doctors are doing on their own across the country. But I didn't know I was going to be persecuted or frowned upon by medical boards, et cetera. And when I started doing this, I didn't really know what to do. So I called the specialists at my hospital, at my local hospital, and the only advice they could give me was they told me to keep my patients out of the hospital at all costs. So, and they're still telling me that today, and to please continue doing what I'm doing. And it's doing a great job. And I have a lot of support from my local physicians who are somewhat hesitant to speak out because of the politics involved. So anyway, a couple of things I wanted to mention today. We were going to talk about a little bit about FDA approval versus alternative therapy. A lot of people are unsure what that means. When a drug is FDA approved, it means that the agency, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, has determined that the benefits of the product outweigh the known risk for the intended use. So this is basically they basically brand a medicine and give it their blessing that this is okay to use with few risks. Most people understand that that's had its problems over the decades with a lot of different drugs. Vioxx comes to mind. There were several that they approved, and then they immediately took them off the market again. There are two drugs that come to, so anyway, we also use medicines in kind of an alternative use. So there are medicines that are FDA approved for one thing, but we use them for another. Alternative medicine is a term that describes medical treatments that are used instead of traditional or more mainstream therapies. For example, two drugs come to mind. The first is amitriptyline. Amitriptyline is an FDA-approved medication, and it's approved for the treatment of depression, but it's commonly used in the treatment of insomnia and chronic pain. That's one, and it's much better at insomnia and chronic pain than it ever was as an antidepressant. The second one is trazodone, which was also FDA approved for the treatment of depression, but it was not very good as an antidepressant, but it's a fantastic sleep drug used in the treatment of insomnia. So doctors all over the United States throughout my entire career have used trazodone off-label to treat insomnia. So that's the case with hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine is indicated for use in lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and some other rheumatological conditions. But here we're using it off-label, so to speak, for the treatment of COVID. Within our state boards, at least Texas, that I know of anyway, any licensed physician is perfectly capable and allowed to use medications off-label. We are supposed to be able to do this as part of our training, et cetera, as long as we have good judgment and then we have plenty of data to back it up. In this case, we have over 50 studies that back up the use of hydroxychloroquine in the safe, effective outpatient early treatment of COVID-19. So I did a poll online, probably some people saw it the other day, and the result of the poll was about 20% of families have suffered long-term effects of COVID-19 because their doctor refused to try early intervention therapy to alleviate symptoms. I would assume that the other 80% of families have just not been touched by the COVID-19 disease at all directly. So I just wanted to mention that. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was a lot of people don't understand how they know if they have COVID. And there's a pretty easy way to kind of determine if you're in trouble at home. There are 6 major symptoms of COVID-19 that I use to diagnose these patients pretty easily and early in my clinic. They are fever, night fever, cough, shortness of breath, fatigue, and body aches. And the more of those symptoms that a person has, the higher the likelihood they have of having COVID-19. In fact, most of the time, if they have 3 or more, I'm highly suspicious of COVID-19. If they have all 6 of them, they definitely have the disease. So, but there's a problem with the testing that some of the doctors on here, I'm sure, have mentioned that the false negative rate is pretty high. I think it's up around 25% based on the calculations off my data. It's about 25%. What a false negative test is, it means that the test was negative, so whether they did the swab or whatever, a rapid test, the test result was negative for COVID-19, but the patient had all the symptoms of the disease. And so we treated them anyway, and they responded to treatment. So that's kind of my definition of a false negative in this case. So I just wanted to touch on how to diagnose it early. The other 2 symptoms that a lot of people talk about is if you have a loss of smell and a loss of taste. And if you have those 2 symptoms, you likely have COVID, because there's nothing really else out there much other than thrush that can cause that. Sometimes a sinus infection could cause that, but the loss of smell and loss of taste in sinus infections is usually much more mild compared to what COVID is capable of producing. So if you have any of those symptoms and then any of the major symptoms, then you likely are suffering from acute COVID-19. With that, I'll turn it back to Bob. That's all I had for today.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Proctor. Go ahead and mute so we can move over. And now I want to introduce us to Dr. Peter McCullough. Dr. McCullough, I just recently met him as a result of reading a letter that he and some colleagues had written to the FDA in support of them issuing a EUA, emergency use authorization, for hydroxychloroquine. And so had a conversation with him, and I'd like to have now Dr. McCullough tell us a bit about why his background is incredibly extensive in what he's done. He degree from Baylor University, graduated from Texas Southwestern Medical School, and did his residency in University of Washington. He's an internationally recognized authority in the role of chronic kidney disease as a cardiovascular risk state, with greater than 1,000 publications and more than 550 citations in the National Library of Medicine. His works have appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of American Medical Association, The Lancet, British Medical Journal, and other top-tier journals worldwide. And so Dr. McCullough is certainly a man that has done a lot of research and knows of what he speaks. Thank you for being on with us today, Doctor.
Sure. Well, thanks for that introduction, Senator, and thanks to each and every one of you. In my view as an academic physician, and they're my personal views, not the views of my institution, there's no roadmap for physicians to handle a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. There's no playbook on how to handle this. And I have to tell you, when this started to develop out of December and January, we were blindsided by this as a medical community. And because we've never faced this before, we dug into most of our conventional approaches to problems in medicine, and that is detailed preclinical study and then a commitment to randomized trials. What a lot of people don't understand is that randomized trials are largely for chronic diseases, and they take 2 to 4 years before we actually have a clear sense of what treatments work and don't work. Randomized trials, in the way they're set up and conducted worldwide, are not well suited to study an emergency pandemic, basically like a war. So you can think that like we're in a war and we have to get to the front lines and start shooting bullets, we don't have time to do randomized trials on every single bullet that we're going to shoot. We'll do randomized trials and we'll get better bullets later on. But right now, immediately, we need an approach. And so what's happened over the last several months, it's been relatively clear that this virus has an early phase where the virus itself is really causing the problem. There are off-target antivirals. Hydroxychloroquine is a featured one, but also zinc, also azithromycin, and now doxycycline. In Russia, they use favipiravir, which is like an oral form of remdesivir. So for that early viral phase, I mean in the first couple of days of illness. Then after that, the illness is really a problem of immune system overload or overdrive, if you will, so-called cytokine storm. And there the featured drug are steroids. Some of you may have taken steroids, dexamethasone or prednisone, and there's many others. But we've learned that they play a critical role. And then along with that immune system overdrive, there's hypercoagulability. That means there's blood clotting in the body, blood clotting in the major blood vessels, and importantly in the lungs. And micro blood clotting in the lungs is what leads to a lot of the decreases in oxygenation and people needing to go on the ventilator. So we've learned that anticoagulants or blood thinners play a critical role. What's been missing, in my view, is in a major medical journal, some guidance to physicians demonstrating that there is a uniformity of current opinion that we should move forward with early outpatient treatment. And so I put together a consortium of doctors, and we've worked hard on this, and we have a fully accepted peer-reviewed publication outlining this approach for early treatment at home for patients recently diagnosed with COVID-19. It's already been cited by the National Library of Medicine. It'll come out in the American Journal of Medicine, and it should be widely disseminated because the doctors have been waiting for a green light from the scientific community to do it, and they have it now. What we're really asking for from a policy perspective is we need the removal of all barriers. All barriers. The state medical board immediately should drop any barriers to any prescription initiated by a doctor to care for a patient with COVID-19 at home. All barriers. And the doctors, in my view, should have facilitated access and authority to issue oxygen in the home, pulse oximetry, and the full flow of these medications. And so my viewpoint on this is that I'm like everyone else, I'm very committed to randomized trials. The randomized trials will help refine this approach, but we needed a base approach to handle this pandemic and avoid unnecessary hospitalization and death. And as Dr. Proctor, Dr. Reed, Dr. Spence, Dr. Stella, others have pointed out, doctors have figured out this disease. We can treat it at home and we can avoid large proportions of these hospitalizations. Our patients don't have to wait in fear for weeks at home and then come to the hospital and be hospitalized and never see their loved ones again. Nursing homes can treat patients in nursing homes and avoid the specter of hospitalization and death. And I shared with Senator that my father developed COVID and he was treated in a nursing home for 4 weeks and survived. So it's very possible with high quality multi-drug treatment, including hydroxychloroquine, but not hydroxychloroquine alone. When we're actively treating, we can use hydroxy with other drugs. When we're trying to prevent the acquisition of disease, that's where hydroxychloroquine can be used alone, as it's been used in other countries. So I'll stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so very much, Dr. McCullough. I really appreciate what you've done and look forward to seeing that paper when it comes out. And also now I'd like to move to Dr. Richard Urso, who's in the Houston area. Dr. Urso graduated from the University of Texas at Houston Medical AOA with highest honors, and then he did an ASORPS fellowship in ocular oncology and ocular facial surgery at University of Texas in Galveston. The compound called nerve growth factor garnered a Nobel Prize for Dr. Levy Montalenti. However, they could not find a medical use for it in humans. Dr. Urso patented the usage and treatment and eventually became an FDA approved in 2018. So Dr. Urso, thank you very much for coming on with us today, and look forward to hearing from you. And,
yeah, thanks so much, Bob. I really appreciate it. As some other people have said, clearly in March, we had some issues where we were getting some pushback, and we had to go through this whole basically process of, we have a new disease, but of course we know coronavirus is one of a family of viruses. So we could look back at some of the old data in that family of viruses and find out we had some good candidate drugs that were available. Certainly chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine should have been on that list. And as time went on, as he said, chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, there's others, remdesivir as came forward, maybe people looked at interferon, but we see that outpatient, it was clearly budesonide, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, doxycycline, azithromycin, and maybe people were even looking at colchicine, but certainly we had some candidates. But now as time's gone on, we have some great news, because we see that these drugs have a lot of clinical effect. Why? Number one, the number one infectious disease person in the world has weighed in on this, about 5,000 patients, Didier Raoult, and he found the drug has worked fabulously in the early treatment phase. So I think that's really exciting to see that. And then we have, as he said, we have some issues where we've had patients now that have had, in a sense, in endemic areas. Why did we not have so much COVID-19? Well, because they were prophylaxed, because it's endemic with malaria. And what's wonderful, Bob, is somebody actually went and compiled the data. They call it the Early Treatment with Hydroxychloroquine Country Randomized Control Trial. And there's 2 billion people in the treatment group, and there's 663 million in the non-treatment group. They tried to throw out any groups that basically were made sway it towards treatment. And I could show you the details of this trial, but what they found here is that in places where hydroxychloroquine is already being used, in patients that are already taking hydroxychloroquine, the case death rate, the fatality rates reduced by about 80%. So we clearly have tremendous data showing that this drug is very effective. Didier Raoult, this countrywide trial, okay. Is it safe? The biggest meta-analysis of all time analyzed everything from 2018 on backwards and found 20 cases of death related to hydroxychloroquine. So I think we need to move on past that. It's a non-issue. Where do we have problems? As the scientific community, Dr. McCullough said so wonderfully, needs to weigh in. What have they weighed in? They did studies at the wrong time, late, gave toxic doses, 12 tablets instead of 1 or 2 in a week, or 1 or 2 in a day. Bulware studies, young patients, phone surveys, those are a randomized controlled trials. Those are a joke. We need to do real studies where really we know that, design the study properly. That hasn't happened. The studies that are being touted to us as being non-effective, like I said, they use toxic doses. And guess what? Toxic doses are toxic. We found that out. Don't give 2,400 milligrams, give 200 or 400. Don't treat patients late in the disease process. That's not a smart thing. It's not going to work as well. But our hospitals here have weighed in. Mount Sinai, Henry Ford Hospital, they've actually had good success in the hospital. So even our hospitals have weighed in. Where have we had problems? Places like Brazil. No offense to Brazil, but 55 hospitals, 400 patients. I mean, literally, Mount Sinai and Henry Ford had thousands of patients in one hospital. I mean, it's trash studies, basically. So we need really well-designed trials, people like Dr. McCullough running those things, who are going to do the right job, right time, right patients, right dose. So I think in general, one last thing on safety, Bob, before I go, is it's when people talk about this drug, hydroxychloroquine. Now, the reason I feel really strongly about it is, first of all, I've had several thousand patients in my clinic over the last 30 years for it. I've dosed it myself. I use it for Sjogren's syndrome, dry eye, but I deal with the toxicity of that drug all the time. It's literally, I've never known a cardiologist to take a single patient off the drug in my entire career. And I've asked around since this COVID pandemic has occurred. I don't know a single one in Houston at the Texas Medical Center. But I want to make a few points. This is the last thing I want to say is that drug is not only safe, but it helps in diabetes, okay? Helps decrease insulin resistance, decreases cholesterol, LDL, improves insulin resistance in obese patients, protects against accelerated atherosclerosis, helps in bone absorption, reduce the risk of chronic kidney disease. It's antithrombotic and antiphospholipid syndrome, decreases the incidence of heart attacks, and its autophagy inhibition helps in cancer. And one cool thing, Dr. McCullough, you'll like to see, because you talked about the thromboses, the neutrophil extracellular traps, low doses of hydroxychloroquine help. So that thrombosis, this is two diseases. Early disease is the flu. The second disease is basically inflammation and thromboses. Actually, chloroquine helps in neutrophil extracellular traps. One of the things that happens, lots of neutrophils late in this disease, really sticky blood. It actually probably helps. That's why they found it working at Henry Ford and Mount Sinai. So it works early, really, really well, prophylactically, and maybe even helpful a little bit late. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Urso. That's very informative. Appreciate it very, very much. Thank you. And now we're going to move to Dr. Mark McDonald. Dr. Mark McDonald is a child and adolescent psychiatrist in private practice in West Los Angeles. Since April, he's been speaking on the need to reopen American schools. His opinions have been widely published in local and national news, including the Wall Street Journal and the Federalist. In July, he joined the Americans Frontline Doctors Summit in Washington, D.C. to educate and inform all Americans on how fear has been driving the government response to the pandemic. And he's going to talk about the damage we are doing to our children by the policies that we have of our schools not being open. And so welcome, Dr. McDonald. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Senator Hall. I appreciate the opportunity. I am a practicing child and adolescent psychiatrist in West Los Angeles, and I do primarily work with children. I'm here today to talk about something that no one has yet brought up, but that I think is really underpinning the entire debate behind the scenes. And that is the pandemic. Not the medical pandemic, but the pandemic of fear. I believe that fear, in its ultimate form, which is hysteria, has driven virtually all of the wrong-headed government responses and medical misdecision-making that we've seen since the beginning of this pandemic in January and February of 2020. My particular concern, though, is with the effect that it's having on children. I am very sympathetic, I'm very empathic with parents and to some degree with school teachers who are literally terrorized by the thought that the moment that a child steps across the threshold at school, he's going to die, not before killing his teacher and perhaps his grandfather before he comes home. I understand the fear. However, the fear is completely misplaced because it's irrational. As Dr. Reed pointed out, the vast majority of deaths in this country from coronavirus come from less than 1% of the population, which is essentially nursing home patients, convalescent home patients. We know this, it's beyond dispute. And yet, the worst thing we did, the biggest mistake, in my opinion, that was made by the government in response to this coronavirus pandemic was that we kept the nursing homes and the convalescent homes open, and we closed the schools. We closed the schools, and they're still closed. Just yesterday, the first metro district in the country, Atlanta, which had been open for about 10 days, shut their schools down once again until at least August 31st because several dozen children were found to have tested positive for coronavirus. Tested positive. We believe, as Americans, as misinformed Americans, that somehow testing policies, testing results should be driving the decision on whether or not children should go to school. It's a false argument. As children largely do not contract this disease with any symptoms, nor do they spread it to others, it's an essentially irrelevant debate. And I'm really bewildered that we're still having this debate today. If we were talking about how to reopen nursing homes, I think this would make a lot of sense, because people in nursing homes do die in large numbers from coronavirus. Children do not. So why are we discussing and arguing about anti-social distancing, masking, daily testing, quarantining, contact tracing for children? It is absurd, and it's medically indefensible. According to the CDC director himself, last week, the rate of suicide in children in the United States has begun to exceed the rate of death of coronavirus. Suicide. But we don't talk about suicide. We also don't talk about bathtub drownings. 400 children every year die in bathtub drownings. Closing lakes, swimming pools, keeping people from bathing. We don't talk about that. We also don't talk about, for the most part, how many children have died of standard flu this year. According to the CDC website, as of Friday, 188 children have died of flu. 188. This contrasts with 45 children who have died of coronavirus, many of whom were already sick to begin with. So approximately 5 times more children have died this year of flu than have died of coronavirus. And this is true every year. About 200 children every year die of flu, and yet we've never closed schools. We've never asked them to distance. We've never worn masks on children. We've never done contact tracing for flu. And flu is actually far more infectious towards adults from children than is coronavirus. A study came out 3 weeks ago from the state of Saxony in Germany. Very high-powered study. 2,000 children and teachers were tested with antibodies. The results of the study, according to the study's own writer and director at the university hospital, found that the risk of infection and transmission in children is so low that, in fact, children provide barriers to the transmission of infection to teachers. They act as an obstacle. So teachers are actually safer in the classroom with children than they are in their own homes. It was such a striking conclusion that the next day, the state of Saxony removed the mask mandate. No more masks for children. And guess what? Nobody's dying. Same thing in Sweden. Same thing with many other countries that never even closed their schools. Everybody is doing fine. So what are we doing and why? What we're doing is, in my opinion, is that we are treating our anxiety as adults and as parents through our children. And we're holding them hostage, and we're making them victim to our own paranoia and our own hysteria. That is actually not only an error, it is neglect. It is, in fact, child abuse. In medicine, you do not institute measures that knowingly cause harm with absolutely no confirmed or evidence-based benefit. And yet, we're doing distancing, making children afraid to be close to one another. We're asking them to wear masks, blocking their ability to read facial expressions, creating dental problems, dermatologic problems, phobias. We're asking children to be tested now in the city of Atlanta, and it's happening, it will be soon in New Jersey when they reopen in a week or two. And if they test positive, they're thrown out of school for 14 days, and all their friends are contact traced and put into isolation. If you want to be on a sports team, you have to take a test. What is this going to do to children who are already scared, who already grab their parents' coat legs when they say, let's go to the beach, as one of mine did a few weeks ago. And the child says, Daddy, I can't go to the beach. Why? Because there are other people at the beach. Children are now becoming afraid of people. That is a clinical illness. That is actually a disease. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have children sitting scared and trembling every day, waiting for this tester to show up to see if today I'm going to be thrown out of school for 2 weeks because I'm diseased. There is no way that this can work. It's not viable. It's cruel. It's punishing. And it's completely useless. Absolutely useless. And this is what we're being told is the way, the path, the safe way to reopen the schools. Well, I can tell you, children who are in school and being subject to this sort of abuse are going to be harmed beyond belief. They're going to wind up with, as I've already seen developing, increased phobia, anxiety, and depressive disorders, self-harm, anorexia, suicide, victims of sexual and physical abuse, and ultimately consigned to live in their parents' basement for the next generation. This is unimaginable, and it's happening right now. I insist that parents begin to think for themselves and that teachers begin to think outside of their unions, and that they accept that even though they're afraid, even though they're scared, their responsibility is to do what's in the best interest of their children. When their kids go to kindergarten, when their children go to camp, when they move away to college, when they marry their husband or their wife, parents feel scared, they're worried, there's an unknown, something bad might happen. And yet they allow their children, not only that, they encourage their children to do that anyway, because it's not about the parents, it's about the children. Well, this is the same situation. This is not about you, parent, mom and dad. This is not about you, Mr. or Mrs. Teacher. This is about the children. Stand up, take responsibility, own up to your obligations to place your children first and do the right thing. Because if you do not, you will be responsible and you will be held responsible for the damage that is incurred. And it's already happened and it's continuing to move forward. We need to reopen the schools in September, just like we did last year. Period, end of story. Anybody who tells you differently is either misinformed or is lying to you. Thank you.
Wow, I don't know what to say almost. Thank you, Dr. McDonald. It is something, it's part of it's part of this problem that we really haven't talked about that much. And I thank you so very much for making it crystal clear that what we're doing is we're ignoring the welfare of our children. And so thank you very much for doing that. And now we're going to move to Dr. been working with here since the beginning on this, Dr. Richard Bartlett, who's out of Odessa. Dr. Richard Bartlett has more than 28 years of experience in medicine, serving his patients as a general practitioner in emergency care settings. His excellence in general medicine is underserved areas came to the attention of Governor Rick Perry, who appointed Dr. Bartlett to the newly formed Texas Health Disparities Task Force. In addition, Dr. Bartlett was the first medical expert in 20 years for the CBS affiliated in the Permian Basin. Currently, Dr. Bartlett is a guest expert on a local radio program on KCRS 550 AM and giving weekly COVID-19 updates. And I know in addition to that, that he has spoken and been on numerous programs nationally and locally, and has been a pioneer in being outspoken about this. And so Dr. Bartlett, welcome to us to be here. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. Dr. McCullough, you mentioned that this is like a war, and there are literally people dying, and there are people who have long-term disability as a result of this disease. And a lot of this could be avoided and should have been avoided from the beginning. But we were given a failed strategy from the beginning of late care only. If someone has mild to moderate symptoms, we have all been told, and we've all been brainwashed, if you have mild to moderate symptoms, just stay home. If you're sick, don't bother a doctor. Don't bother a hospital if you're sick. Wait until you have severe symptoms and then go to the emergency room, get a test. And very often people get a test and they're told, yes, you're positive, you do have COVID. Go home, tough it out with Tylenol, and come back when you're sicker. And the strategy from the beginning has been ventilators, 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 which is a disaster. And we can see how the mortality goes. You've just crossed a threshold when you get on a ventilator with COVID, where you have damaged tissues that are now being pounded with high pressure PEEP. And we can see where that leads. We have 8 months of experience now. And so we are still hearing late care only. The United States population is being told late care only is their only option by and far, unfortunately, from the quote unquote leaders. But the practicals of somebody in the emergency room like myself and many of my peers, or in the primary care setting, is that you have to take care of your patient that's right in front of you. And the fundamentals are still the fundamentals. Airway, breathing, circulation. Breathing is still important. ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation, is part of CPR, part of advanced cardiac life support, part of advanced trauma life support. I'm an instructor of advanced trauma life support. We teach the ABCs. You stabilize the patient. And if someone's having trouble with their airway, stabilize it. If they're having COVID, and 50% of the people that have COVID have symptoms of diarrhea, vomiting, you treat that circulatory problem with IV fluids. Although there is no FDA-approved medication for COVID, you still give them IV saline, IV lactated ringers. You give them Zofran, you give them Phenergan, because you treat the symptoms, you stabilize the patient. But this is a respiratory inflammatory disease, COVID is. And so using a respiratory anti-inflammatory bullet, Dr. McCullough, you mentioned bullets. I'm calling this a silver bullet, budesonide, because it's a respiratory anti-inflammatory treatment that has a profound effect against a respiratory inflammatory disease called COVID. If someone comes to the emergency room, and I work in the emergency room as well as other primary care settings, and they come to me and they say, I can't breathe, then I'm going to help them breathe. I'm going to take care of the breathing problem. I'm going to give them something that is FDA approved to decrease inflammation in the lungs. And this is a medicine, budesonide, has been out for over 25 years. It's generic, it's cheap, it's readily available. Millions of Americans every day are using inhaled budesonide, and they're not in the news. This is not in the news for the last 20 years because it's so safe. It's so safe that when it was studied on 2-pound preemie babies in the ICU, a very delicate human, and they found that it was safe in that situation. It's safe in the nursing homes. As long as someone is breathing and they have a respiratory inflammatory disease called COVID that is life-threatening, that is killing tens of thousands of Americans all around us all the time, this is a silver bullet to deal with the inflammation of the lungs. It's putting the medicine in a targeted form right where the problem is. And here's my experience with patients. When I use inhaled budesonide with a nebulizer machine so that I get a higher percentage of the medicine in the lungs, when someone is having trouble breathing and they can't use an inhaler effectively, some research shows that an inhaler, 90% of the medicine many times does not get to where you need it in the lungs with an inhaler. How about if they have COVID and they're in respiratory distress and they can't take a deep breath? A nebulizer makes a mist and a greater percentage of the medicine gets to where the problem is. Looking back at the research over the last 20 years that everybody has access to on the internet, amazing to me, budesonide, inhaled budesonide in the lungs decreases the release of the cytokines, interleukin 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11, 13, 15, also thromboxanes, the interleukin, which increases the hypercoagulable state. It also decreases leukotrienes, which is what montelukast blocks. It decreases the release of SCF and GM-CSF, inflammatory cytokines as well. This is what I'm finding with my patients on a practical level, is that all of their symptoms are improved when you treat at the source with a medication that decreases the release of inflammatory enzymes and inflammatory cytokines. For instance, we know that someone can have the flu, which is a respiratory inflammatory disease, and have GI symptoms only. And so if you use, I have had patients that use the inhaled budesonide nebulizer treatments and their diarrhea stops. All of their inflammatory, all of their symptoms are, the root cause of all of their symptoms is the release of the inflammatory cytokines, the release of inflammatory enzymes from the lungs. This is an intuitive treatment There are many bullets in our fight against COVID, but inhaled budesonide with a nebulizer treatment should not be taken away from the American people. This is a medicine that's in every pharmacy, in every hospital, at every pharmacy, on every corner, in every city and town. It's readily available. It's basically $3 a treatment for a generic medicine that can help people breathe and decrease their chest tightness, which is related to it. And literally, for many patients, their oxygen saturation goes up while they're getting their first treatment. Common sense seems to have been thrown out the window in January. Every doctor was told, stand down. Don't help your patients until they're critically ill. We don't do that with any other disease. The top 3 killers in the United States do not include COVID. The top 3 killers in the United States are heart attack, stroke, and cancer. All of those screenings were put on hold because of a fear from the government authorities and leadership. And we were withholding appropriate screening and early care for the top 3 killers. For the top 3 killers, we've made great strides over the last decades because of early treatment. We don't say, wait until you've lost 30 pounds and you're short of breath from your lung cancer and then seek help with stage 4 lung cancer. We do early screening, we do early treatment. And we've been extremely disappointed with the efficacy, with the sensitivity and the specificity of the COVID's testing. And so we have to rely on good medical judgment in our training to look at symptomatology, as Dr. Abraham, a US congressman from Louisiana, who is a doctor who's treated hundreds with COVID, says. We need to treat the patients. We don't need to wait until they're deathly sick, and early treatment has the best results in every disease, including COVID. Budesonide is currently being studied as an inhaled steroid against COVID by Oxford, by Queensland in Australia, the university, by the country of France, by the country of Spain, and by the NIH. That study will be done in October. We're practitioners. We care about the patient that's in front of us. We have a responsibility. And on a final note, I want to say the patient and the patient's family are the ones that have the decision-making power. That has been thrown out the door in January. The Patient Self-Determination Act of 1990, the Joint Commission of 2000 clearly state that the patient and the patient's family are the ones that are supposed to sign the consent for their surgery, sign the consent for their care. And if they refuse care, it's their right. But right now, they're not being told in a clear manner, which is legally their right, what their options are of treatment, and they're not being allowed the decision-making authority. And so this is illegal, it's unethical, it's immoral, what's being forced on the American people of late care only, and effective medications that help stabilize the patient are being removed. This is unconscionable, and we need to jump tracks to a winning strategy. We're embarrassed by countries like Taiwan that has 24 million citizens and only 7 deaths during this whole pandemic. The United States has been the #1 premier healthcare system in the world up until January. And we need to get back on track and treat our patients, do the right thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bartlett. I appreciate that very much. And you're absolutely right in what you're talking about, this insanity of telling the patients to go home and wait until they're so sick they can't stay at home, and then come back to the hospital where they really don't get any medical treatment in the hospital. They get a comfortable bed and a respirator and then a ventilator. And so I thank you very much. And now I want to move to someone that was one of the first doctors that I got involved with here out of his work that he did early on, Dr. Robin Armstrong, who I not only is a colleague in that he is our national committeeman for the Republican Party, but I consider him to be a good friend, and he is certainly a friend to the patients that need his help. Dr. Armstrong practices medicine in his hometown, and is an owner of Armstrong Medical Group, which is a group of hospitals and nursing home physician, nurse practitioners, and physician's assistants. He was featured for his successful treatment of 38 COVID-19 patients at one of his nursing facilities where he serves as medical director. And this was early on when it first began. And he was also instrumental in working to get 1 million doses of hydroxychloroquine donated to the state of Texas at that time. And Dr. Armstrong has been on healthcare panels with President Trump in attendance at the White House, and recently participated with President Trump on a panel named Transition to Greatness. Welcome, Dr. Armstrong. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Senator Hall, for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all these doctors. Y'all are magnificent. I really appreciate everything you've done. So I'm a hospitalist, and so I work in the hospital, and we also have a large nursing home practice as well. And so what happened is we early on in this pandemic, we were treating patients in the hospital with hydroxychloroquine. We were treating them with azithromycin and zinc, and we were seeing some limited success. I've treated people with remdesivir. I've treated people with Actimra. I've treated them with convalescent plasma. We've treated them with IV dexamethasone. So we've treated them with all those therapeutics. And my contention, having that experience has been, treating people early on is the key. Treating them with hydroxychloroquine is the key, azithromycin and zinc. That is the key to preventing them from getting on the ventilator, which I'm seeing currently. I'm treating people on the ventilator with COVID-19 yesterday, today, and I'll be seeing them again tomorrow. At the nursing home, on April the 2nd, we had a mandated treatment from our health director. They mandated that we test everybody in the nursing home with COVID-19. And what we found was that we had 56 patients that came back positive for COVID-19. 55 residents, and we had 31 staff that came back positive. So a total of 86 that came back positive in that nursing facility, including staff and residents. And at that point, that was an emergency situation for us. I mean, we were not expecting that, but it was an emergency situation. We had just come off the heels of what had happened in Washington State, where they literally lost almost half of their residents. In the state of Tennessee, they made the decision to just empty out their nursing home and send all the patients to the hospital, which was a disaster as well. As anyone knows, the hospital is where you want to keep these patients out of the hospital. The elderly's mortality rate significantly goes up when they go to the hospital. And if you put those patients on a ventilator, then they're almost certainly not going to survive it. And so we knew that. We had seen in the hospital, we had seen some studies in China, we had seen some studies in France that showed that hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin and zinc together actually had some mortality benefit. And so we decided to do that. And I didn't realize this. We were just treating patients. I didn't realize that we were the first nursing home in the United States to actually treat a large number of patients with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. And that was lost on us. We were just treating patients in the way that we thought would be best. We monitored them. We actually pulled staff from the hospital and pulled them into the nursing home. We basically set up a medical ward in a nursing facility. And so we checked oxygen saturations every 8 hours. We literally had the administrator and the owner in that nursing facility. We're checking oxygen saturations on patients. We're checking vital signs on patients. We were following these. So we had 2 physicians in our practice. We had 1 nurse practitioner in our practice, and we had a support nurse that rounded with us on these patients every day. We followed them extremely close. And so what we did was we ended up, to make a long story short, we treated 38 of those patients, and we had 37 of them survive and recover from COVID-19. And so, this was extraordinary results. We were excited about it. We monitored them closely. We actually did EKGs on the patients because, we were concerned. We got the EKGs read by a board certified physician. So we really were being very, very cautious in what we were doing because, you know, it's actually not my nature to do things. I'm a conservative guy. And so I was just trying to do the right thing by these patients. And ultimately it turned out to be the right thing. We had many of our patients recover, which you would not expect. These are the oldest patients. These are chronically ill patients. They all have heart disease. Most of them have congestive heart failure. And we treated them and monitored them closely and had a very good outcome. Our intention was, you know, all the elected officials were aware of this at the very top in our state. You know, they were all aware of it. Our health director was aware of what was going on, and we had positive results. Our intention was to take these observations that we had, and this wasn't set up to be a study. It was set up to treat patients. We were just treating patients. Our goal was to take our observations and send this out so that everyone could see it, because our expectation was that this would be the standard of care for how you would treat patients in a nursing home setting. Well, that did not happen. Quite the opposite happened. In fact, we were attacked for what we did. The media attacked us from the Houston Chronicle, from local television stations attacked us for what we did with a positive outcome. You know, there's just been a crazy attack against this medication for some reason, which completely surprised us. And so we literally have been, you know, we've been on the Laura Ingraham show. We've been on the radio here multiple times in the Houston area. We've done a lot of national interviews trying to get the message out, but it is amazing to me how the medical boards, the FDA, other physicians, the media have been in opposition to treating patients per the standard of care. I'm amazed at it still, and it's very, very disappointing. I believe that we have lost lives. I believe that our most valuable assets in society are elderly people who have fought wars, who have given their lives, who have sacrificed, who have taken care of me and taken care of our kids and our grandkids and given us wisdom of their years. And I believe that we have neglected them as a nation, and I believe that we have let them down. I believe the media is responsible. I believe that our elected officials who have not stood strong are responsible. I believe that our bureaucrats, our medical boards are responsible for the deaths of many thousands of elderly people who I believe should be alive today had they simply taken our observations and put them into practice. When we started to treat these patients, we knew that these medicines were safe. I actually have traveled to Africa on multiple occasions. I bought hydroxychloroquine over the counter in Nairobi, Kenya. I took it for 6 weeks, and which was a much higher dose than what I was giving any of these patients. And I had no side effects. You talk to Dr. Emmanuel, who's taken the medication as malaria prophylaxis, and I was taking it as malaria prophylaxis. These medications were safe. So we were doing what I thought was reasonable to save the lives of these patients. The end result was we saved the lives of many of these patients, but nevertheless, we were attacked for it. And I believe that is what has happened with this whole pandemic is wrong. I believe it's immoral. I believe that we have let many people die who should not be dead today. And I believe that the studies are showing more and more that hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and zinc are effective. The studies are coming out more and more day by day. I believe that there will be a reckoning. I believe that there will be the American people will be so angry when they find out that their loved ones could have had treatment and they were not treated. And I believe that is going to be a source of profound anger and disgust when the American people figure that out. I'm convinced that the observations of all of these physicians and our observations are observations that should have been championed and should have been it should have been a national story. And this medication should be used broadly throughout our society right now as a prophylactic and as a treatment for those who are infected. But it has not been, and I think that is exceedingly unfortunate. And frankly, I'm angry about it. I'm irritated about it. And I believe that the American people will be as well. So I want to thank you all for standing and taking the stand. It's a battle that is continuing on today for us, for the medical boards, for myself personally. And I believe it's very unfortunate, but the fight goes on, and we're gonna win this battle, but it's not gonna be to the help of many Americans who are already deceased from this horrible disease. And so I just want to thank you all. Thank you, Bob, Senator Hall, for all that you've done to get us together and get this message out. So thank you, and God bless.
Well, thank you, Robin, so much. God bless you for your courage and what you're battling, which is more, as we know, more than just with your patients and being able to treat them. We've got one more speaker to talk to the group here from a little bit different perspective. This is our non-doctor who's going to now speak to us. But as some of you who have spoken here today, doctors, you know that him and his role is now going to be vital in protecting you. As you work to protect your patients, you're now having to be protected from the government, from our dysfunctional medical board here in Texas, our dysfunctional pharmacy board, that has taken it upon themselves to lash out at the doctors for saving lives. I find it absolutely appalling that they would even consider what they're doing in some cases. And so I've asked Steve Mitby, who is an attorney. Steve is a Harvard-educated attorney who founded his own law firm in the Woodlands, Texas area. He represents some of the largest companies in the state and has experience in healthcare. He is representing physicians against the Texas Medical Board to protect their right to treat patients with hydroxychloroquine. And he's going to discuss some of the legal issues around COVID and how they're affecting our state. And I think it's I wanted to have Steve on as a part of this so that the public would understand that you guys are sticking your necks out, you're putting your license at risk, and in what you're doing, that your dedication to your profession of fulfilling your Hippocratic oath, as Dr. Proctor said, far exceeds your following the orders of a bureaucrat. And so in this battle, Steve is going to be one of the people that's going to be in this, protecting you while you're protecting the patient. So Steve, thank you very much for taking the time and coming on here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. Thank you for having me. And thank you for all you do in the state Senate to protect our constitutional rights. And thank you to the doctors who are on this conference as well for your courage and your excellence in care. You're really on the front lines serving patients and protecting all of us so that we can live our lives and continue to enjoy some semblance of normal life and business in the midst of this pandemic. So thank you all. I'm here today to discuss with you the legal implications of the state medical board's actions in trying to restrict doctors' ability to treat their patients with hydroxychloroquine and other drugs. And this is a huge disappointment for me. I'll tell you first, I'm not originally from Texas. I grew up in the Midwest. I moved down here because I believe that Texas has one of the best legal communities in the country, and it's a freedom-loving state. It's a place I wanted to raise my family. I've been here for 18 years, and I'm a proud Texan. And so with that, given the image that I've had in my mind of Texas my whole life, I was very disappointed to find out that there are bureaucrats in this state, by which I mean doctors and pharmacy officials who sit on medical boards and pharmacy boards who don't share our values and don't believe in freedom, and unfortunately use their power through their bureaucracy to try to restrict your ability to treat patients as you see fit. In my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most Americans, there's almost nothing more sacred than the doctor-patient relationship. When you choose a doctor, you're choosing somebody for their judgment, their wisdom, their integrity, their experience, and ultimately you're going to make decisions about one of the health of yourself and your family based on what that doctor advises you to do. And there's nobody that should come between you and your doctor. And certainly nobody in the government who should try to intimidate your doctor into giving erroneous medical advice to you or withholding treatment that you need. And so I was very surprised to learn that even in a state like Texas, where most people believe strongly in freedom, they believe strongly in the right to choose your doctor, and they believe in the value and the integrity of that relationship. I was surprised to find out that there are bureaucrats who don't disclose themselves. They don't give their names. They're anonymous and behind the scenes, and they think it's okay to try to tell doctors what to do. And what we have learned, unfortunately, is that the Texas Medical Board is sending letters to doctors threatening them about hydroxychloroquine. You'd think that the Texas Medical Board would be at the front lines of trying to encourage people to use this important drug, but they're not. They're actually sending letters and threatening investigations against doctors. And they have, to my knowledge to date, they have not actually taken any disciplinary action against a doctor. But unfortunately, the threat is enough because people in the medical community know that this is happening, and many doctors are unwilling to prescribe hydroxychloroquine because they're afraid of getting investigated. I've even had relatives in Texas who've told me that their doctors won't prescribe hydroxychloroquine. They won't give it to them unless they're in the hospital. And there's no medical reason for that. The reason for that is because these unelected bureaucrats who've been appointed by the state medical board and the state pharmacy board are whispering in their ear and spreading this campaign of misinformation. Unfortunately, the Texas Pharmacy Board also took steps very early in the pandemic to restrict hydroxychloroquine. They claimed that they were doing this to prevent people from stockpiling the drug, but the restrictions that they put on hydroxychloroquine went far beyond that. They said that you could only have up to a 14-day supply, and they also said that you had to present a written script with a diagnosis before you could get it. And as you doctors know, it's very unusual for this pharmacy board to require a written script for anything these days. Normally, your doctor can just call in a prescription and then you as the patient go to the pharmacy and pick it up. Here, they were requiring the doctor to sign a prescription and issue an actual diagnosis that would be delivered to the pharmacist. And that raises all kinds of privacy and civil liberties concerns, because when you do that, of course, the doctor is then having to tell people other than the patient that he or she is prescribing hydroxychloroquine for COVID or as a prophylactic for COVID. And that was the very thing that the state medical board was investigating. So these rules imposed by unelected bureaucrats were designed to intimidate and deter doctors from doing the right thing to treat patients. And it's something all Texans should be aware of, because again, we don't think of Texas as being a place like where that could happen. I mean, you think that could happen in California, Massachusetts, New York, places I've spent a lot of time and places I've handled cases over the years, but you don't think it could happen here, and yet it has. So I think it's important that everybody be aware of that, and that you tell your elected senators and representatives that you don't want that to continue, because it is endangering lives and it's denying people the treatment that they need. I even had a doctor tell me that she wanted to get some hydroxychloroquine for her husband, who's elderly and has diabetes as well as other pre-existing medical conditions. And she actually had to get a doctor in Nebraska to prescribe it because she couldn't get it in Texas, even though she's a licensed Texas physician. Again, that's very disappointing. It should not be happening here. What we've been doing to counteract that is we've been representing physicians who've been accused or sent letters by the Texas Medical Board. And our strategy is very simple. Get the facts out. send the medical board the research, the information, the knowledge that we've all gained through the studies that have taken place in many different countries to show that hydroxychloroquine works. Because if you're going to punish a doctor for prescribing hydroxychloroquine and using it to treat patients, you need to do so with full knowledge of the facts, the fact that the treatment is effective and it's been proven effective in many situations. And so far, we've been successful in holding that off. But again, the letters alone are enough to deter the majority of doctors from doing what they need to do. So in conclusion, I'll just wrap up by saying that, you all are on the front lines of this. You guys need to be encouraged and supported in your efforts to treat patients. And it's our job in the legal community and as citizens to bring attention to this problem, to let our elected representatives and people in the medical community know that we don't want the medical board and the pharmacy board to punish doctors who are prescribing hydroxychloroquine, and for us to stand up to these bureaucrats so that they don't get away with this. It's obviously being motivated by a political agenda, and that's very disappointing, but there's a lot that we can do as citizens to stop this from continuing to happen and hopefully learn some lessons from it so it doesn't happen in the future. I truly believe that hydroxychloroquine should be available over the counter. I don't think you should have to get a doctor's prescription. And in many other countries, that's been the case for a long time. Many countries that are a lot less free than we are. And so I hope one of the lessons we learn from this is that maybe the medical board and the pharmacy board should have less power to regulate. And those types of decisions should be returned to the hands of doctors and patients where they belong.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I got one, before you get, I've got one question that that I think has come up in a lot of people's mind. We had this problem, of the phony study that was done, published in the Lancet, that it wasn't a study that they said, oh, this had a few flaws to it. It wasn't really what it should have been, et cetera. What we did find that it was absolutely a total bogus, phony study, totally created to mislead people. And yet that doctor that did that, nothing has happened. Is there a path for any kind of prosecution for someone that does something like that? Because that had a tremendous impact and actually has resulted in the death of a number of people. It would be equivalent to the screaming fire in a crowded theater, in my opinion. Is there anything that you see can be done from a legal standpoint on that?
Well, I would think that, a doctor that, again, I would want to limit this to situations where a doctor knowingly publishes false medical information based on an agenda, which is what happened with this Lancet publication. And of course, the Lancet is one of the most respected medical journals in the country. And those editors really had egg on their face when they had to withdraw the article based on false information. And in my experience, it's very unusual for any scientific researcher to present false information. Controversial information is common. Information that ultimately proves to be wrong is common. But when you violate the basic standards of scientific integrity and you publish something that is false, that's on a completely different level. And yes, that doctor could end up losing his license and probably should lose his license. In addition, I would think that doctor would lose any academic credentials that he has and the ability to author scientific articles in other journals. I would think all of those sanctions can and should be applied. Whether there's an actual criminal or legal sanction beyond that, I doubt, because normally publishing false scientific information is not itself a crime unless you're getting a government grant for it and you somehow defraud the government or commit another financial crime in connection with the false research. But there are very serious professional sanctions that can be applied, and I would hope that they would be. in this case. It's just disappointing again that medical research has gotten politicized to the point where somebody would do that. I mean, we should all be on the same team here, the team that's fighting COVID. And that means, you know, conducting research with integrity, not trying to use research to prove a political point.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate it, and appreciate the work you're doing to help protect our doctors as they try to help protect the patients. And now what I'll do is I've got a couple of slides I want to close with, and then we're going to open this up to questions. We got a number of the press that's on, and I know all of you have are on a tight schedule, but I hope you can stay for just a few minutes because I know we got some folks with some burning questions that they'd like to ask. So let me do this 30,000 foot close here. If I can get the chart open. And I don't see it on here. Okay, I just want to say that 30,000 feet, we have to change the direction we're going in. The policy that we have in place of how we've been pursuing this thing, if you listen to these doctors and what they've had to say, is we have strictly a defensive strategy, and defensive strategies do not win. They don't win in battles, they don't win in football, they don't win any place. They just stop the other team, and you've got to have defense, but you win with offense. Our current strategy, which is defense only, is mask, business closures, and isolation with no meaningful patient treatment taking place in the hospital. I don't think that anybody could say that what they're getting now, which is basically a drug that is now showing that it doesn't work, a respirator and a ventilator, is what is needed. I think it was really clear from what our doctors said that this is an ailment that needs early intervention. But all we're doing is the physical things and just hoping that the COVID will go away. And we have to move from the late treatment that's killing the patients to early intervention, because a defensive strategy is designed to fail, and it's going to fail big. We need an offensive strategy, and an offensive strategy is one, it goes after the COVID, goes after to defeat the COVID. And we do that while encouraging the use of existing drugs that these doctors, I think, have proven beyond any doubt at all are effective. Far more effective than the do nothing that we currently have would be the least you could say about it. We need to understand and recommend what they have said in this policy of early intervention treatment. This is being done in other countries. Matter of fact, I just read an article where one of our South American countries, the government is actually going door to door, passing out hydroxychloroquine to the residents there. Whether they have it or not, they're passing it out as a prophylactic. And that's what we need to encourage, that instead of having all this emphasis on test, and getting information that just leads us astray, we need to be recognizing that we can prevent this from even getting started. And we need to recognize that in this, as several said, we have a very narrow sliver of our population that is vulnerable. We have those with an immune system compromise and our elderly, in which the preponderance of the deaths have occurred, and we need to recognize that and focus our attention on protecting them, not punishing the entire population and our economy with our defensive strategy. We need to change to an offensive strategy. And so with that, let me close out this part of it and open it up. We've got some folks there that had some questions. We'll be able to take a few. We can't stay here much longer because these are working doctors. They have patients that they've carved out time in the middle of the day to be with us here. So let's go ahead. Amy, how do we identify where the questions are coming from? Or go ahead and open it up.
Hayden, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Senator Hall, thank you for opening it up for questions. I have a question for everyone on the panel, and thank you all for your presentations, but specifically, Dr. Spence, at the beginning, you mentioned that you felt common sense had left the conversation, and I wonder what you believe it will take for people to begin applying common sense to the coronavirus struggle and the coronavirus pandemic. And also to everyone in the panel, what do you think it's going to take for the medical community in Texas, and specifically the Texas Medical Board and the Texas Pharmacy Board, to become more receptive to hydroxychloroquine and budesonide treatments, as Dr. Bartlett discussed, could be possibly a silver bullet or even just a more effective treatment? What do y'all believe as physicians will be the silver bullet to opening a conversation and creating a dialogue in the medical community for a more open-minded discussion about possible treatments?
Okay, thank you. Dennis, you want to take
Sure.
the first part of that question briefly?
Well, thank you for the question, because common sense, that's kind of a broad term that needs to include a lot of things. And here's the basics. When you're speaking common sense, you take available knowledge that everybody's aware of, for instance, or should be aware of, or can easily obtain. And a common sense thing would be like, is hydroxychloroquine safe? Well, if it's been administered over 1 billion times worldwide, with the incidence of any consequences being so low as to hardly be measurable, a common sense tells you that's a safe drug. Common sense means, for instance, if somebody says you stay 6 feet apart and or wear a mask or do both, common sense says, well, how many times has somebody walked within that 6 foot distance and purposely sneezed or coughed in your face? It's extremely rare, if it even happens at all. And I ask people things like, the mask has become one of the things that people are falling back on. And I say, okay, go out to the next time you walk into a store, when common sense has told us from the very start that hand washing and using sanitizers is one of the most effective means of controlling any type of virus outbreak. And suddenly everybody's wearing a mask, and you stop seeing people using hand wipes and disinfectants. Anybody can do that, walk around, but you have to use the common sense to recognize what you're seeing out there. So this is part of the problem of the common sense issue. And one of the things I also ask, that I would love to see the press ask, a real simple question. We've been focusing on death counts. Instead of focusing on death counts, why not ask the simple question, how many of the admissions to the hospital are 48 hours or less versus how many are 48 hours or more? Because the ones that are 48 hours or less oftentimes were put there for observation rather than for aggressive treatment or therapy. And we need to separate those. So there are a lot of little issues like that that need to be taken up.
Okay, how about
Hey,
Bob? And you've got a bit of experience.
Can I weigh in on this, Bob?
Sure, go ahead, Richard.
Okay. So I've had this fear of reprisals because I've been reported to the board. I've treated a lot. I'm an ophthalmologist, but I've treated a lot of patients. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to leave the number at 3 because that's what the board knows. Okay. But we have to worry about bureaucrats who don't see patients, who are basically now having to admit they're wrong. That's not going to happen. There's no dialogue. There's just go on, run towards the truth. Okay. And I can't worry about the bureaucrats because my patients are dying today. All right. So I don't care if the board agrees or disagrees with me. All right. And that's, as a practitioner, seeing close to 50 patients a day. All right. And a lot of my patients with COVID who can't get treated by other doctors are coming back to me to talk to me about it. I can't worry about the board. That's up to people like you who have influence in the media to help us, and lawyers to help us to get them off our backs. They with the 1997 Act of Congress says the FDA has no role in a drug once it's left, it's approved for FDA. We can use it off label. It's not alternative. It's called off label. Off label means We use it for other things because we found out that it works. And like you said, in the middle of a pandemic, we can't worry about that. So people like yourself, media people, and other people need to put pressure on them to get them off our backs. Let us do our jobs, okay? Because that's what we need to do. And the fear of reprisal is real. There are several people, at least 3 that I know of that are on this call that have been reported to the board, okay? And me being one of them, all right? Why? For taking care of people. In March, I knew it was a bad idea. I knew candidate drugs were out there because of other studies and other coronaviruses. It's an airborne RNA virus. This is not a mystery. This whole novel stuff is bunk. There's the early flu-like disease for the first week, and then there's the thrombotic inflammatory disease in the second week. And you've heard a lot of people comment on that, but think of it as 2 diseases. We know this disease. We know there's treatment. And at the end of the day, we got to get people out of our way because we're doctors. We know what we're doing. The people who are telling us are not seeing patients. And what's awful is it's a coordinated attack. I don't know if you know, maybe you don't know this. They fabricated studies in the Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, fabricated them. Where does the fabrication come from? Harvard. The lead author was from Harvard. Think about that. A fabricated study. It's like saying Tom Brady had to lose the Super Bowl. The Astros had to lose the World Series because they cheated so badly that they completely lied, and they completely had to replace that data set and admit that they made a mistake. And that's what you're asking these bureaucrats to do. They're not going to admit they made a mistake. They're going to double down. That's how it goes. It's up to us to prove them wrong. That's what we have to do. The best defense is an offense. I'm not going to ask them. I'm going to take care of patients. Other doctors like me, we're going to go take care of patients. The evidence is there. As I told you, in every place in the world where they're using hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine as endemic for malaria, those people do not have any COVID. What happened when the Chinese came to Africa? They had to get prophylaxis with chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. They didn't give it to Africans because they were getting the prophylactic therapy. When they went to Europe and when they went to America, they didn't take chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, and they easily transmitted it to our population, which is not prophylaxed. That's the story right there. That tells you everything. The proof is in the pudding. You saw the numbers that I presented. 2 billion people in the treatment group, 600,000 in the control group. Difference in death rate is over 80%. Think about those numbers, 80%, billions of people. The drug is super safe. 20 deaths in 63 plus years by the largest meta-analysis. What more can I say? It's not only safe, as I told you before, but it's incredibly helpful for diabetes, insulin resistance, lipid profile, chronic kidney disease, heart disease, accelerated atherosclerosis. It's antimalarial, antiviral. I mean, list goes on and on. It's what the one drug you want if you get on a desert island, hydroxychloroquine.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Urso. Let me round it out by giving you my take on what is needed out there, Hayden, and for those others in the media, is we need media out there making honest reports about what's going on. We need media to participate in getting the word out on what is actually happening out there. I can't imagine any other situation in which the government and others are doing such harm to the people of America and so little is being said about it. I mean, the data that are presented that shows the death rates, it clearly shows that had we been using these drugs early on, that 90% of the people that have died unnecessarily. Yet there is the only thing we hear out there being reported is how many new cases we have. That's the big news of the day, all the focus on the new cases, and that's not the message out there. So let me move on. I think we've got another question here from, I think, Brandon, you have a question?
Yes, it's actually a question for you, Senator. You've obviously been a leading voice in joining many doctors and in taking on the state medical board and hosting these conferences. Are you seeing any actions right now from either the governor or the legislature to address these issues and move to, as you put it, an offensive strategy? And if so, or if not, what actions should be taken?
The answer is, do I see any movement being made? No, absolutely none. I've had no response. I've written the governor now several letters, and each one of them had a positive aspect to it of what should be done that's very consistent with what these doctors are saying. We know that the government here in Texas is well aware of the success that Dr. Armstrong had and the others. But I have seen no action, no movement. Matter of fact, I've talked with the medical board, I've talked with the pharmacy board, and I get incredible pushback from them as though they are little gods over their kingdom. And they're going to do what the bureaucrats in Washington tell them to do. And we see that the opposition to this is not organic to Texas. It comes out of Washington, and it comes out of the national media. You see it how they jumped on the issues that put down, when Trump brought it up of hydroxychloroquine, but it was obvious from the beginning that they were going to be opposed to any kind of a treatment. And I think that somewhere along the lines, there needs to be some real investigations into the people that work at the CDC and the NIH to see what kind of financial ties they have to some of these pharmaceutical companies that are out there working real hard to come up with a new expensive drug or a new expensive vaccine to use while they're doing all they can to suppress something that's a 25-cent pill. That's what people pay that have insurance. If they don't have insurance, it's probably about 75 cents a pill. It doesn't get much cheaper than that, and much more effective than that. And what Dr. Bartels has, his is even cheaper than that. And we have governments in other countries that are giving it away to the people. It was suggested by one person that while we're doing the testing, what we ought to have is a little brown bag that has in it the hydroxychloroquine, erythromycin, and zinc, hand it to the people, because when they take the test, all they're determining is, have they been exposed prior to that? Once they leave that testing site, they could be exposed before they get home. So if they're concerned about it, give it to them. If they do have it and they're in early stages and don't know it, that's when it needs to be treated. And if they don't have it, by taking it, it would be a prophylactic to keep them from getting it. That's what I'm told by the doctors. And I think that's what you heard several of them saying here as we talked to them today. And so, no, the answer, that's a long answer to your question, Brandon, but no, I do not see any movement in our government to do anything other than this. We have a Capitol that is shut down, closed to the public. And as was told today to the folks, the staff meeting, there is no plan to reopen the Capitol. We have no date. We have no plan. We have nothing going forward. The only plan I know of is that so far we have been able to stop any changes in the rules to move to virtual committee hearing meetings. I don't know how long we'll be able to hold that up. I hope until we can actually get back in the business of having committee hearing meetings. But no action so far. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, I do have one more question, if that's all right. And again, my name's Hayden Sparks, and I'm with the Texan News. And my second question is for Mr. Mitby, with respect to the legal jeopardy that these doctors potentially face for protecting their patients with these medications. How would you assess the legal risk for them, not just now, but in the future, also for other doctors who may decide to step forward? And what resources do you think are available to doctors in the state of Texas who may choose to move forward with hydroxychloroquine and budesonide, even though it's not popular yet with government agencies in Texas and out of state as well?
Well, I think ultimately the risk is quite low because the science and the evidence is on our side, and I believe in our system. And I think that ultimately the truth will win out, whether that will win out at the level of board review or that will win out in court later if we were to have to challenge a decision by the medical board. I don't know, but I'm confident that the doctors who are being harassed will ultimately be vindicated. The tragedy of this, though, is that bureaucrats don't operate in the open. They operate behind the scenes. They send letters and threaten people, but they don't follow through by taking actions where they're going to be scrutinized and have to face an impartial tribunal. That's the tragedy of this. So it's easy for a bureaucrat on the medical board to send out a letter. It's not so easy for them to prove a violation that stands up to scrutiny. So that is why I believe they're continuing to send out threatening letters instead of actually pursuing these cases. So that's my answer. Ultimately, we're going to win. I'm confident of that. But in the short term, it's having the intended effect of discouraging doctors from doing the right thing. And I think that's a real tragedy. I think if anything, this crisis should be an occasion for reform, to really take a look at these medical boards and pharmacy boards and ask the question, who's serving on them? Why are they there? What powers do they have? I mean, many times the people that serve on medical boards are doctors who aren't very busy seeing patients. They're not great doctors, so they sign up for bureaucratic roles instead. Should these boards have the kind of power they do, or should more drugs be available over the counter? And perhaps should they be restricted so that they can't interfere in the doctor-patient relationship? I don't know if you knew this, Hayden, but did you know that the Texas Medical Board is empowered to investigate anonymous complaints? That means that you can file an anonymous complaint against a doctor. You don't have to be a patient. You could be a coworker, you could be a nurse who got fired, you could be a doctor that's involved in a monetary or a business dispute with the doctor, and you can make an anonymous complaint. And the way that the board is currently set up, the doctor who is accused never actually gets to see the complaint or know who filed it. That's very troubling to me, because in America, we shouldn't have anyone subject to anonymous accusations. There shouldn't be anonymity if you make an accusation against somebody, yet the Texas Medical Board apparently thinks that that's an acceptable situation.
And
So
I think also you could be a liberal journalist as well who could also make a complaint.
you could be, yeah, you could be politically motivated, you could be financially motivated, but my view is you have to have transparency, you have to have fairness, and you have to have accountability for these bureaucrats. And I'm hopeful that good people like Senator Hall will be able to sponsor some legislation in the future, some carefully crafted legislation that will actually make our system better, so we learn from this experience.
I've made a statement, if I will, really quickly, that I think sums up a lot of what's going on with the medical boards, and it sums up how afraid physicians are to prescribe these medications. So I've run into physicians who take the medicine themselves when they're affected with COVID-19. They prescribe the medications for their family members when they're infected with COVID-19, but they will not write it for their patients because they're afraid of the medical boards. Now, to me, that explains a lot. They take it themselves, they prescribe it for their family members, but they will not prescribe it for their patients because they're afraid. I talk to ER physicians who will say, and I literally gave them the protocol because the hospital that I was working at on this particular day was being filled with patients and filled with a lot of COVID-19. I'm saying some of these patients you can send home. To Dr. Spence's point, some of these patients you can send home. And I told them the regimen for hydroxychloroquine. And the question I get repeatedly from ER physicians, well, Robin, am I going to get in trouble with the medical board if I prescribe this? So physicians are fearful of that. And that's unfortunate that they're willing to give it to themselves and their families, but they won't give it to their patients. I think that's shameful.
Yeah, and I really echo what Dr. Armstrong just said. I know of a number of doctors that are doing exactly that. They won't give it to their patients. And that seems almost like a breakdown of the Hippocratic Oath, but it's because we have these anonymous bureaucrats. They're often doctors who couldn't make it in private practice, who are involved with the medical board, and they're trying to get in the middle of the doctor-patient relationship, and that's wrong.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Let me there's one other aspect in answer to your question. I'm going to say something, and I'm going to ask Dr. Urso to, I believe he's gotten a question that was texted to him also. But there's the issue of the availability of hydroxychloroquine. Is there a problem out there? Actually, we now have a two-layer problem. We started out with the pharmacy board and what they were prohibiting, but doctors are now finding that the major pharmaceutical companies like CVS and Walgreens and Walmart and Kroger's and some of the others have a corporate policy now of not filling prescriptions unless it is for the traditional use of lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, et cetera. I think that's unconscionable because my understanding, and Richard, you can clarify this if when you speak here, but there is no shortage. It's an easy drug to manufacture. It's something if we could turn to and start producing PPE and ventilators overnight, we certainly could grind out this 25-cent pill pretty fast. But it's my understanding there are about 63 million doses in a national stockpile. Texas has about 1 million doses. And we're not talking about a large amount that's needed for any one person. The initial, as I understand it, and you can correct this, Richard, is 12 pills or less is what's needed to address this. So it's not like this is going to be something that would swamp the system out there. Richard, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Well, as you know, the supply chain was a problem early on in March. So I can understand some issues then. But no, the supply chain now, as you said, we have 63 million in the national stockpile. As you know, I've been to Washington. I've been to visit Vice President Pence. I visited with Birx and members of the CDC and members of some of the other committees that would be involved in this. And basically, we want to get that stockpile out there, and that's something that we're working on, and hopefully it will happen. But yeah, you don't need very much. For prophylaxis, you may need as little as 2 tablets a month. It looks like the issues have come down to not so much the supply chain side, Bob, but more of access. And so they're limiting access for us. And on top of limiting access, there's a fear of reprisal. So those are the two main issues that we're dealing with. And it's a shame because we have every other country in the world. You can go to Iran and get it off the shelf. You can go to a lot of places to get it off the shelf. And as I mentioned, I want to keep hammering this is the data is in. It's very effective. And all the trials they're pointing to that are randomized controlled, they basically did wrong patients, young, or they did, which basically they're going to get no data from that. If they're young patients, they do well with almost nothing. And then they did late disease with massive doses, 12 tablets. So the data we have some really good data, and it works incredibly well early, and we don't need much. As you said, to treat one patient who has early disease, we only need probably 12 tablets. If we want to do prophylaxis, we probably looks like need 2 tablets a week, and some people think as little as 2 tablets a month. I think the data is pretty clear that 2 tablets a week works really well. I didn't mention it, but it's a 90% reduction in the studies that have been done in cases. And also, when people do get the disease with hydroxychloroquine, what I tell people is they're sometimes PCR positive, and they use that as a way to kind of say, oh, it doesn't work. What you don't know is PCR means dead virus, live virus, partial virus. So if we have somebody with partial virus, basically, or dead virus, it's still PCR positive. And a lot of those hydroxychloroquine patients are basically, I tell people, and I talked to the CDC guys, and they understood this. They're coughing up a vaccine, basically. They're coughing up a dead attenuated virus. And they actually issued some really good guidelines. I don't know if you've seen them last week, allowing people to get back to work sooner, even with a positive PCR. So the CDC guys have been much more reasonable. And if the messaging out of Washington improves, that'll help. But there's no way for us to go double down and sort of beg the people in our bureaucracy to do the right thing. No, they're not going to do it. I already know. I've talked to them. I know people on there, and it's not going to happen. It's up to the media people who can put pressure, the attorneys. We can't, as doctors, show them the science because they would have to admit that they were wrong, and a lot of people died because of what they did. They're not going to do that. You have to be, common sense is going to say they're not going to admit it. We're just going to have to, we just have to go elsewhere. And as
as Mr. Mippy said, the truth will run towards the truth, and that's what we need to do, and keep going towards the truth. The truth is hydroxychloroquine works quite well, especially early.
Okay, well, thank you. And I think we're going to wrap it up here. I appreciate y'all taking them. This is probably one of the longest press conferences that anybody has seen in a while here, but I think it was important that we get this message out from a large number of our doctors, all doing almost the same thing and getting the same good results. And so now it's, people ask, well, what is it going to take to change this? It's going to take the people out there. That's why we're doing this. They're getting the truth, to start speaking up. I mean, our government is made up of the people, and our founding fathers intended for it to be a people's government, and it is that, and it starts with the people. But unfortunately, we have too many people that are just complacent and are willing to follow and not speak up. But now is the time. I urge you, get prayed up so you can stand up and speak up, because it's going to take the people talking to their representatives and government with letters and emails and questioning everything you see that goes counter to what you've heard here today. And so to make this happen, it's going to take the folks out there getting the word out and putting the pressure on with questions and phone calls and emails to your elected representatives. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and close for now. God bless each of you. Thank all of you for being on here today. I appreciate you so very much. And we'll be back together soon to talk about our next step. Anyway, God bless you. God bless Texas.